What if the Newars, long called the original people of the Kathmandu Valley, were never a single race at all, but a deliberate, almost surgical fusion of two worlds? They call it a paradox, a city of temples whose blood refuses to choose. Modern genome studies across autosomes, Y chromosomes, and mitochondrial DNA reveal the Newars as a razor-sharp balance. 50% ancestral North Indian, ANI, and 50% Tibetan, East Asian ancestry, a symmetry so precise it reads like a design rather than accident. Listen to the bones of the story. The fathers, tracked through the Y chromosome, carry a striking South Asian signature. About 62% of Newar men bear RM207, Sawachanch, R haplogroups, markers closely tied to Indo-European populations of the Gangetic Plains and beyond. At the same time, the Tibetan male marker D, dominant among Sherpas and Highlanders, is almost missing in the Newar paternal pool. This is not a whisper of contact, it is a clear imprint of male-mediated movement from the south into the valley. But the mothers tell a different tale. A large mtDNA survey of 999 Nepali individuals, Basnet et al. 2022, found that Newar maternal lines mostly trace to lowland Indian and East Eurasian sources, not the high Tibetan plateau. In other words, Indo-Aryan men arriving in the valley tended to intermarry with local Tibeto-Burman-derived women. This sex-biased pattern explains why Newar culture kept a Tibeto-Burman language core while adopting Sanskritic elite trappings. Even the calendar of this mixing is precise. Admixture dating methods place the major fusion at Padwan Darwan 504 years before present, the early 4th to 5th century CE, the same century the Licchavi dynasty appears in the epigraphic record, the time when Sanskrit courts and Gangetic networks reached Kathmandu. The genetic clock and the stone inscriptions tick together. Picture the valley then, a crossroads where traders, refugees, priests, and rulers met, where blood, language, and ritual braided into a civilization that would call itself Newar. No single origin, only a deliberate balance that shaped law, worship, and craft. But who or what engineered that exact 50-50 equilibrium, and why did Kathmandu, alone among its neighbors, become the place where two continents met and merged so evenly? That balance, that perfect 50-50 split in the DNA, it wasn't born in a throne room. It began far earlier, in a valley that was once no valley at all, a lake sealed off from the world, waiting to become the stage for one of history's greatest fusions. Long before the DNA, there was a lake that vanished and left behind a fertile valley where the story of the Newars began. For centuries, the Swayambhu Purana told the tale, a story of Bodhisattva Manjusri, who with a stroke of his sword cleaved the mountains open, draining a vast lake and making the land habitable. A myth, or so it seemed, until modern geology proved otherwise. Beneath the soil, scientists found thick sediment layers, the fingerprints of an ancient lake bed. The legend wasn't just imagination, it was memory preserved in myth. And when the waters were gone, the settlers came. Around 500 BCE, the Kirat tribes, Tibeto-Burman in origin, entered the valley. The Gopala Rajavamshaval Chronicle claims they ruled for 32 generations. They brought animist rituals, mountain deities, and the Tibeto-Burman substratum that still lingers in Newar culture. These Kirats were the first rulers, their presence etched in the oral histories and rituals of the valley. Then, history leaves us a harder trace. At Changunarayan, the oldest surviving Hindu temple of Nepal, a stone pillar inscribed in 464 AD tells us of kings, settlements, and organized power. This inscription is the oldest in Nepal, proof that by the 5th century, the valley had become not just fertile land, but a thriving hub of people, religion, and statehood. From the silence of water, the first urban heart of Nepal began to beat. From the emptiness of a drained lake rose the temples, streets, and languages of a people who would one day call themselves Newar. But the Kirats alone could not have created the dual DNA of the Newars. Another wave was coming, one that would forever transform the valley's bloodlines. They arrived not as conquerors, but as refugees fleeing collapse, yet their arrival in the 4th century AD rewired the valley's DNA and destiny forever. From the south, from the ancient city of Vaishali in North Bihar, came a displaced people. They were the Lichavis. Fleeing political upheaval in the Gangetic Plains, they crossed into the fertile valley of Kathmandu. Not as an army seeking plunder, but as a community in search of survival. And yet, survival turned to empire. By the 3rd to 9th centuries AD, they ruled here. They brought with them the language of the gods, Sanskrit, carving their presence into stone. The earliest known mention of the word Nepal itself survives in a 512 AD inscription chiseled under their reign. They carried with them Vedic rituals, the Hindu pantheon, and the structure of caste, laying down new hierarchies upon the valley's soil. But this was not a story of erasure. It was a story of fusion, written not just in temples and inscriptions, but in the blood of the people. Geneticists find the Lichavi imprint deep in the valley's DNA. Y chromosome data reveals the surge of South Asian lineages, R1A, H, and L, markers tied to Indo-Aryan elites. And yet, the maternal DNA tells us a different story. These men intermarried with Tibeto-Burman women already rooted in the valley. A pattern repeated over generations, shaping a hybrid identity that refused to tilt fully in either direction. This is why the Newar language, Nepal Bhasa, still beats with a Tibeto-Burman grammar, even as it absorbed over half its vocabulary from Indo-Aryan tongues. A living echo of the DNA itself, one half southern India, one half Himalayan East Asia. The Lichavis rewrote the culture, but the people did not vanish. Instead, they merged into something entirely new, the bi-ancestral core of the Newars. But here is where the story twists again. Because when scientists dug even deeper into the DNA of the valley, they uncovered something no one expected. Haplogroups in Newar blood that trace not just to India or Tibet, but all the way to Europe and the Middle East. And that's where the shock deepens, because these aren't faint whispers in the genome. They are bold, unmistakable signatures, fragments of bloodlines stretching across continents now found in the heart of the Himalayas. Hidden inside the veins of the Newars are fragments of Europe and Arabia, lineages no one expected to find in the Himalayas. The Y chromosome tells this story with brutal clarity. In Newar men, geneticists detect R1b1, a lineage tied most strongly to Western Europe, Spain, Ireland, France. They find J2A and J2B, markers carried for millennia through the Middle East, Anatolia, Greece, and northern India, sometimes linked to Jewish diasporas, sometimes to Persian and Mediterranean traders. And there is C3, a haplogroup with roots in Mongolia and the Central Asian steppes, carried by horsemen and soldiers who once thundered across Eurasia. These haplogroups were documented in comparative Y-DNA studies of Kathmandu, Gaydon et al. In 2007, Basnet et al. 2022, leaving little doubt. Outsiders did not just pass through, they left descendants. How could such distant lineages land here? The Kathmandu Valley was never isolated. It was a vital hinge of the Silk Road world, a middle station between the Gangetic Plains and Tibet, between India and China. For centuries, salt, wool, and silk caravans wound through the high passes. With them came Arab merchants, Persian craftsmen, and steppe guards. Newar traders themselves established merchant houses in Lhasa, Shigatse, and Darjeeling by the 18th century, but those networks stretch back much earlier, hinted at in medieval chronicles and trade records. The valley was not a hidden bowl, it was a crossroad. Imagine a festival mask in Bhaktapur, its paint chipped by centuries, its design echoing both Himalayan demons and Mediterranean faces. Imagine a stone carving at Patan that carries not only Buddhist symbols, but geometric motifs more familiar in Persian mosques. Every artifact, every surname, every ritual in the valley might carry a whisper of these wanderers from afar. Kathmandu became a genetic sink, pulling in fragments of Europe, Arabia, and Mongolia, and binding them into its own fabric. But here lies the paradox. With all this inflow, with outsiders arriving century after century, why didn't the Newars dissolve into the people who came? Why didn't they vanish into the very currents that carried so many others away? What secret allowed the Newars to absorb the world, yet remain themselves? The secret did not begin in temples or bloodlines. It began in words. Because even when armies passed, when rulers changed, when traders came and went, the voice of the valley refused to vanish. Nepal Bhasa should have disappeared, yet it survived, a Tibeto-Burman tongue dressed in Sanskrit robes. Linguists describe it as a paradox. Structurally, Nepal Bhasa is unmistakably Tibeto-Burman, its grammar built on SOV word order, its syntax shaped by classifiers, its rhythm echoing the highland tongues of the Kirats. But when you open its lexicon, you find something else entirely. More than half its words come from Indo-Aryan languages, Sanskrit, Maithili, later Nepali. It is a language standing on one mountain, but cloaked in the robe of another. Van Driem, 1999, calls it one of the most Aryanized Sino-Tibetan languages in the world. This is no accident. The timing is exact. Genetic admixture places the fusion of Newar ancestors in the 4th-5th centuries CE, the very moment Indo-Aryan rulers, the Lichavis, entered Kathmandu. The people mixed, the rituals mixed, and their tongues mixed too. In the Lichavi courts, Sanskrit was the language of power and inscription. But in the markets, in the homes, on the steps of temples, people still spoke Tibeto-Burman. Over generations, the two bled together into a hybrid tongue that kept its bones Eastern but wrapped them in Western flesh. Picture a scene: a Lichavi king addressing his ministers in Sanskrit, words of law and ritual carved into stone, while artisans outside his palace answer in Tibeto-Burman grammar, but using Sanskrit loanwords to name their tools, their gods, their festivals. Both sides called this speech Nepal Bhasa, and in that moment, language became a bridge, not a battlefield. Scripts too tell this story of duality. Nepal Bhasa was written in alphabets descended from Brahmi, the script of India's empires. Yet its structure clung to Sino-Tibetan roots. It was, in essence, two languages at once, a voice that mirrored the very DNA of its people. And that voice did something extraordinary. It became the glue that held outsiders and locals together. It allowed the Newars to borrow without breaking, to absorb Indo-Aryan words without surrendering Tibeto-Burman identity. The tongue itself was survival. But it wasn't just language. This duality built temples, palaces, and festivals where Hinduism and Buddhism stood side by side like two mirrors facing each other. And in the Kathmandu Valley, those mirrors were not opposites. They were reflections woven into one vision, one skyline, one faith that could wear two faces at once. In the Kathmandu Valley, the gods of India and Tibet were not rivals. They shared the same shrines. Stand before Swayambhunath, its white dome rising like a mountain of light, prayer flags whispering in the wind. To Buddhists, it is the great stupa of enlightenment. To Hindus, it is a shrine of Adi Buddha and Harati Mata. The same bricks, the same incense, two worlds meeting in one breath. Or walk to Baudhanath, built in the 5th century, a cosmic mandala that still gathers pilgrims from Tibet and Nepal alike. And then there is Pashupatinath, the great Hindu temple of Shiva, yet within its courtyards, Buddhist monks once walked, prayers overlapping in the smoke of the same lamps. By the Malla era, from 1200 to 1769 AD, this fusion reached its peak. The valley became a cultural furnace. Pagoda temples rose into the sky, Purba paintings glowed with tantric visions, bronze statues shimmered with delicate detail, and wooden struts carved with gods and demons looked down on bustling squares. UNESCO describes the period between 1500 and 1800 AD as one where Newar art and architecture reached one of the highest levels of craftsmanship in the world. And it wasn't just stone and paint, it was ritual, alive and breathing. Indra Jatra, when a Hindu god of rain is honored with Buddhist chariots. Biscuit Jatra, when myth, blood, and laughter collide in a tug-of-war that is half Hindu, half Buddhist. And the most haunting of all, the Kumari, the living goddess, chosen as a child from the Newar Buddhist community, worshipped as an incarnation of the Hindu goddess Taleju. A Buddhist girl, made into a Hindu goddess, seated in a palace that is neither temple nor monastery, but both. Walk through the Durbar squares of Kathmandu, Patan, Bhaktapur. Every brick, every spire, every festival mosque whispers the same truth. This was not coexistence, it was convergence. But beneath this harmony was a deeper truth. The Newars were not a single ethnic group, they were an entire nation community. And here comes the contradiction that shakes the ground. Because what if the very people we call an ethnic group were never a single ethnicity at all? What if an ethnic group was never one ethnicity at all? The Newars were not a tribe with one origin, nor a clan guarding bloodlines. Anthropologists call them an epiculture, a civilization made not by exclusion, but by absorption. In the valley, you could find Brahmin priests chanting Vedas beside Buddhist Vajracharyas, Kshetri warriors beside artisans and farmers, Shakyas and merchants beside butchers and potters. The Newar caste system was a miniature universe, with nearly 70 distinct subcastes, each carrying a fragment of South Asia's wider mosaic, yet all bound together under the single word Newar. And the DNA agrees. Studies reveal that 95% of genetic variation lies within Newars themselves, meaning that the genetic differences between a Newar priest and a Newar potter are almost as wide as the gap between entire ethnic groups elsewhere. Only about 5% separates one subgroup from another. In other words, being Newar never meant being one thing. It meant being everything, and still calling it one. This was their paradox and their power. Where others searched for purity, the Newars built strength from mixture. They absorbed outsiders, folded them into castes, wrapped them in language and ritual, and made them indistinguishable within a generation. Newar identity was never fragile. It was fluid, yet unbreakable. A fusion so total it became an identity in itself. But the twist is this. No civilization built on such delicate balance can stand untouched forever. Because in 1768, fire came from the west. The Gorkhas under King Prithvi Narayan Shah stormed the valley. 3 kingdoms, Kathmandu, Patan, Bhaktapur, fell one by one. Temples were looted, palaces torched, the Golden Mala age ended in blood. The hybrid empire of the Newars, artists, traders, priests, and farmers, faced a collapse that could have erased them from history. But instead of erasure, conquest forced a new transformation, one that would change the very meaning of being Newar. That transformation began with war. The year was 1768, and the armies of Gorkha stood at the gates of the valley. 1768, the Gorkha conquest shattered the Newar kingdom, but not the Newar soul. It was a storm of steel. Prithvi Narayan Shah, the ambitious king of Gorkha, had set his eyes on the Kathmandu Valley, the jewel of the Himalayas. His dream was unification, but his method was fire. The Newar city-states, divided among rival Malla kings, could not resist for long. One by one, the proud kingdoms of Kathmandu, Patan, and Bhaktapur collapsed under the weight of Gorkha cannons and soldiers. Palaces were looted, royal treasures seized, and the Malla dynasty, guardians of the valley's golden age, was extinguished. For the Newars, it was the end of political independence. Their Nepal Bhasa, once the language of courts and inscriptions, was silenced under the rising dominance of Khas Nepali. Their festivals were watched by rulers who were no longer their own. The valley, which for centuries had been their kingdom, was now the capital of someone else's empire, the newly forged Nepal of the Shah kings. And yet, conquest did not erase them. It scattered them. Like shards of a shattered mandala, Newar culture spread in fragments far beyond the valley. Newar merchants established thriving colonies in Lhasa, Shigatse, Darjeeling, and Kalimpong, keeping the arteries of trans-Himalayan trade alive. Their craftsmen, woodcarvers, bronze casters, painters, became the artisans of the conquerors, leaving Newar fingerprints on temples and shrines far outside Kathmandu. Even in defeat, their art and commerce carried their identity outward like seeds on the wind. But history remembers not just the fall, but the whispers around it. Chronicles tell of Malla treasures hidden beneath temples, of rituals interrupted mid-chant as the Gorkha armies stormed in, of the Kumari's tears staining palace stones as her kings fell. For the Newars, this was not only conquest, it was trauma, a scar carried in legend, festival, and song. The mandala of the valley cracked that year. But cracks do not always mean destruction. Sometimes they reveal hidden patterns waiting centuries to be seen. Because even in their political defeat, the Newars carried a secret in their blood and culture, one that modern science is only now decoding. That secret would not be uncovered by kings or chronicles. It would be revealed centuries later in the language of genomes. And when the results finally came, they carried a twist that shocked even the scientists themselves. In 2022, scientists tested 999 Nepalis, and the Newars stunned them with a genetic paradox. The study was massive, the most detailed ever of Nepal's people. Led by Basnet and colleagues in 2022-2023, it compared DNA across castes, regions, and ethnic groups. What they found in the Newars rewrote the story of the valley in numbers that could not be denied. Start with the maternal lines. Mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mothers, should have shown heavy Tibetan ancestry, as many had long assumed. But it didn't. Instead, most Newar maternal lineages trace to the lowlands of India and East Eurasia, not the Tibetan plateau. A revelation that upended earlier theories of their origin. Then came the autosomal DNA, the broad genetic canvas inherited from both parents. Here, the balance was almost eerie, roughly 52% ancestral North Indian and 48% Tibeto-Burman. No other group in Nepal came close to such symmetry. The Rai, Tamang, and Maga carried over 80% East Asian ancestry. The Indo-Aryan high castes of the plains were over 90% ANI. But the Newars, they alone sat at the crossroads, fused almost perfectly in half. Even the timeline matched the myths. Genetic admixture dating pointed to around 1504 years before present, the 4th to 5th century CE. The very moment the Licchavi dynasty rose, carving Sanskrit inscriptions into stone and reshaping the valley's destiny. Science and history ticked to the same rhythm. The weight of it is haunting. In every cell of a Newar body lies proof of this valley's story, a living record that kings could not burn, invaders could not silence, and centuries could not erase. The genome itself becomes the final witness. But if the Newars are the children of balance, what does their future hold in a world obsessed with purity? And the truth is stranger than the question. Because the Newars never were one thing at all. They were always two, and that became their survival. The Newars are not Mongoloid, not Aryan. They are something far rarer, a civilization born from perfect balance. That balance runs deeper than blood. It is a paradox carved into every layer of their identity. They are at once indigenous and hybrid. They descend from Tibeto-Burman tribes who first settled the drained Lake Valley and from Indo-Aryan migrants who carved inscriptions and dynasties into its stones. They are Buddhist and Hindu, worshipping the same goddess through two faces, Kumari as Talaju, Kumari as Vajradevi. Their festivals, from Indra Jatra to Biscuit, Jatra, are not borrowed but merged, rituals where Buddhist monks chant beside Hindu priests. Science sharpens this picture. Basnet et al. 2022-23 found the Newars hold 52% ancestral North Indian, ANI, and 48% East Asian Tibeto-Burman ancestry, the most balanced admixture of any group in Nepal. Compare that to the Rai, Tamang, and Maga, who carry over 80% Tibeto-Burman DNA, or the high caste Indo-Aryans, who are over 90% ANI. The Newars alone stand at equilibrium. Even the genetic clock tells the same story. She 1,504 years before present, in the 4th-5th century CE, the very century of the Licchavi dynasty's rise. Science and history strike the same hour. Language mirrors the genome. Nepal Bhasa is structurally Tibeto-Burman. It uses classifiers, SOV order, and tonal rhythms. Yet more than half its lexicon is Indo-Aryan, borrowed from Sanskrit, Maithili, and Nepali. Linguist George Van Driem, 1999, called it one of the most Aryanized Sino-Tibetan languages in the world. It is the perfect twin of the DNA story. Indo-Aryan fathers, Tibeto-Burman mothers, a language with two skeletons fused into one. Even conquest could not break this duality. When the Gorkhas invaded in 1768, when Nepal Bhasa was suppressed by caste Nepali, the Newars carried their festivals and crafts beyond Kathmandu to Lhasa, Darjeeling, Kalimpong. Their art between 1500–1800 AD reached heights that UNESCO still calls among the greatest craftsmanship in the world. Their identity was never about purity, it was about survival through mixture, resilience through duality. The Newars proved that identity is not fragile when it is mixed. It can be fluid, yet unbreakable. A civilization can be both, and in being both, become something greater. But their DNA holds one more unanswered mystery, and that will lead us into the next story in this series.